Good afternoon. I pray that your Monday was filled with spaces and places of joy, of peace, of happiness, maybe some time of reflection, of reflecting of what is and what is not, reflecting on all the blessings that you currently have in your life and not putting so much emphasis on the things that are going awry. Sometimes all it takes is one thing that we can be grateful for, and it kind of shifts our mood. How many of you know it's so easy to focus on the negative, and sometimes so much more challenging to focus on the positive? But all it takes is one positive thing, and it can make us smile. It can put us at peace, at least for a moment. We will continue our conversation. I think these will be the last one in terms of the signs that your relationship may be toxic. And then starting tomorrow, I believe, we will start talking on about what you can do about it. Today we have two things. One is hoping for change. And this really resonated with me. I have to admit that doing this series has been very eye-opening for me. It has helped me to reflect of where I have grown from, what my new edges are, and how very grateful I am for healing and restoration, and how hopeful I am that for those of you who may be struggling in toxic relationships, that you also will find a place of peace, of healing and restoration. Hoping for change. You may stay in a relationship because you see the other person's potential, or you think you can change yourself and your actions. This morning, I was beginning a different meditation process, and it requires journaling. And so I pulled out an old journal. I tend to buy journals, start them, and then don't necessarily continue the process. But as I look back, this was a journal from almost 20 years ago. And I read two of the entries, and oh my, I was miserable. At least what I journaled about. Now, I don't know if the rest of the time had been filled with joy, which I sincerely just don't believe. But I know that for whatever reason, I started writing, and I wrote about how I was just hoping and praying for change. Just hoping and praying for change in two of the relationships that were currently quite challenging in my life. Now, I want to remind you when I say two relationships, it was not that I was not monogamous, but remember that toxicity can exist in relationships that are erotic with your intimate partner. It can also exist in relationships with your parents or your siblings or your children, co-workers, people who you worship with, sorors, frats. Wherever we find ourselves in relationship, there's always a possibility that maybe the persons we are interacting with, we may not necessarily bring out the best in each other. It may very well be a toxic relationship. But anyway, I read those two journal entries from almost 20 years ago, and I was in a lot of pain. And it was painful to some degree to read it because it was reminders, but I did not become sad. I did not become upset. I did not become depressed because I could look at it as a place of where I had been and rejoice that I am no longer there now. I am no longer in such emotional pain. I am no longer there now. And so what I say to you in terms of looking at your own relationship to see if it's toxic, are you spending a great deal of time just hoping for change, praying for change, or even doing something that people have shared with me and I have been guilty of in the past myself, hoping for some external force to create the change, hoping that somehow or the other something will happen from outside that will rescue us from these toxic relationships. The challenge with that is that we're not taking responsibility for our own life. we're not taking responsibility for our own choices. We're looking for someone or something to rescue us when all in all, we have the power to make adjustments. We have the power to control ourselves and our responses and who we choose to interact with and how we choose to allow their behaviors to impact us, or ultimately whether or not we will continue to pour into a relationship that is not healthy, that is not fruitful, that is not bringing us joy. And remember, joy is not a 24/7 all the time experience. The same way we need sunshine as well as rain, joy does come with pain. But we want to make sure that it's balanced. We want to make sure that the good times outweigh the bad. We want to make sure that our relationships have enough of a firm foundation that they can weather the good times, weather the bad times and come out even better, come out even closer, come out in a healthier state of being. But just sitting around hoping for change, just sitting around praying for change, prayer is powerful. Prayer can change things, but in James it says faith without works is dead. I believe when we praying, we are listening for guidance. We are listening for direction. And change typically comes when we submit and say, okay, whichever direction I'm supposed to go in, whatever it is I'm being instructed to do, I'm not going to say, but, well, you see, well, you know, but I'm going to be faithful and have enough courage to follow that. Okay? I'm not going to just sit around and hope. I'm going to begin to look at where I can adjust myself, where I can hold myself accountable, where I can begin to set boundaries, where I can begin to express my needs, where I can begin to assess, is this healthy for me? And if it's a relationship that I'm not willing to give up on, then how can I participate in it in a healthier manner? Our second thing, which kind of brings us to a place I really not talked a whole lot about, but in a lot of toxic relationships, there is physical violence, okay? And I have talked about the fact that emotional violence is just as detrimental as physical violence, because sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will harm you. Words will stay with you. Words are things that we rehearse and we continue to repeat to ourselves. It's usually the words that were said to us or about us that we find hard to let go. But if you're in a toxic relationship, you may find yourself walking on eggshells because you are afraid. You are afraid of igniting the rage of the person who you are in this toxic relationship with. And sometimes that rage looks like you being pushed, or sometimes it looks like you being hit, or sometimes it looks like your things being smashed or destroyed. Sometimes it looks like you being called all kinds of names. Sometimes it looks like you being given sarcastic remarks and your character denigrated. All those things can create a situation where you find yourself in relationship that may be toxic and you're walking on eggshells because you do not want to erupt that rage in the other person. You do not want to be caught off guard. You do not want to have to endure the fire and the just mean-spiritedness of the other person. But how many of you know that walking on eggshells takes so much out of you? It keeps your anxiety level up to the highest degree because you're constantly on guard about what's going to happen next. Is this dinner going to go well? Can we at least get through dinner without yelling, without screaming, without plates being thrown, without food being knocked off the table? Can we at least get through this ride to church? Yeah, to church. Without feeling like, just totally exhausted by the time you reach the place of worship, where you then have to put on the happy face so people will not know what just happened in the car, either on the way there or on the way back. Walking on eggshells can be so detrimental to your health. It keeps your anxiety up. It keeps your stress level up. It can impact your sleep. It can impact your eating. It can impact your desire to even indulge in things that once brought you joy. It can make you out and out depressed because you're walking on eggshells. And I like the term walking on eggshells because eggshells are so fragile. It doesn't take much for it to break. And if you're in a relationship that even having a conversation, saying good morning, if that relationship is so fragile that it doesn't take much, if the relationship is so fragile that you find yourself thinking, we were having a good conversation, what just happened? How did we all of a sudden end up in this tumultuous space? You're not even real clear what you said or did that was wrong or that incited the person. That's definitely a sign of a toxic relationship. So I invite you to consider these things. I invite you to consider them on purpose. Again, we're not trying to find fault if there is no fault. We're not trying to make you look at your relationship with a magnifying glass and say, aha, just because you didn't agree with me on one thing, this must be toxic. No, we're asking you to look at this from a holistic perspective, recognizing that we are talking about extremes. A healthy relationship has good times as well as bad, but what makes it healthy is people are willing to work through it. And we will talk about some of those things. People have great communication. People are able to be themselves, which is the exact opposite of toxic relationships. It's not good. You don't feel good. And 9 times out of 10, the other persons or persons are not feeling good either. So starting tomorrow, we'll begin to talk about what can you do? What are the options? Where do we go from here? I invite you to find some space today to just enjoy today. My understanding is that certain parts of the country are experiencing heat waves, so find ways to stay cool and to hydrate. Not with sugary drinks, but hydrate with good old H2O, with water, or with fruit that has lots of water in it. Melons and all kinds of fruit. But take care of you. And I will talk with you tomorrow. Love you all. Bye-bye.